The sound of a child's terrified screams pierced through the bustling chaos of Pike Place Market on that rainy Tuesday afternoon. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Jeffrey Morrison had heard many things in his 34 years as a single father and successful tech entrepreneur, but nothing quite like the raw panic echoing from his 6-year-old daughter Emma as she collapsed to her knees beside the flower vendor's stall. Her tiny hands clawed at her chest, gasping for air that seemed to elude her completely. Shoppers stepped around them with uncomfortable glances, their daily routines too important to pause for a stranger's crisis. Jeffrey felt that familiar surge of helplessness wash over him as he knelt beside Emma, his own heart racing with the terror that every parent knows when their child is suffering and they don't know how to fix it. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, came the most unexpected sound. Soft, melodic humming accompanied by the gentle whoosh of something magical floating through the air. Jeffrey looked up to see a man in paint-splattered jeans and a faded flannel shirt, crouched at Emma's eye level, blowing the most perfect, shimmering bubbles Jeffrey had ever seen. The stranger's movements were deliberate and calm, each bubble catching the market's fluorescent lights like tiny rainbows dancing in the space between panic and peace. Emma's sobs gradually quieted as her wide, tear-filled eyes focused on the floating spheres, her breathing slowly matching the stranger's steady rhythm. Jeffrey Morrison prided himself on being prepared for anything. As the founder and CEO of Morrison Digital Solutions, he had built his company from a cramped studio apartment into a $40 million enterprise by anticipating problems before they occurred and having contingency plans for every possible scenario. His daily schedule was color-coded and synchronized across 3 devices. His emergency contacts were laminated and stored in multiple locations. He carried a fully stocked first aid kit, backup phone chargers, and enough snacks to sustain a small army through any unexpected delay. But nothing in his meticulously organized world had prepared him for watching his daughter Emma spiral into a full-blown panic attack in the middle of Pike Place Market on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. They had been running a simple errand, picking up flowers for Emma's teacher's birthday, when the crowds and noise had suddenly become too much for her sensitive nervous system. The past 18 months since her mother Sarah's sudden death from a brain aneurysm had left Emma prone to these overwhelming episodes, especially in crowded spaces that reminded her of the hospital where they had said their final goodbye. Jeffrey knelt beside his daughter as she hyperventilated on the market's worn wooden floors, her small body trembling with the force of emotions too big for her 6-year-old frame to contain. He tried everything he could think of, speaking in soothing tones, offering her water from his emergency supply, even attempting the breathing exercises her therapist had taught them. Nothing worked. The concerned glances from passing shoppers only intensified Jeffrey's own anxiety as he watched Emma's panic escalate beyond anything he had witnessed before. That's when Marcus Chin appeared beside them, moving with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to handling crises. Jeffrey had noticed him earlier, browsing the produce stalls with a boy who looked to be around 8 years old, both of them examining vegetables with the focused attention of people who took their grocery shopping seriously. Now this stranger was crouched at Emma's eye level, pulling a small plastic container from his jacket pocket with movements so gentle they barely disturbed the air around them. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The first bubble emerged from Marcus's weathered lips like a perfect sphere of hope, catching the overhead lights and reflecting tiny rainbows across Emma's tear-stained cheeks. Then came another, and another, each one floating with impossible grace through the crowded market space. Marcus began humming softly, a melody Jeffrey didn't recognize, but that seemed to create a pocket of calm in the chaos surrounding them. Emma's ragged breathing started to slow as her attention focused entirely on the magical display unfolding before her. Within minutes, the transformation was complete. Emma sat quietly on the market floor, reaching up with tentative fingers to touch the bubbles as they drifted past her face. Her breathing had returned to normal, and the terrified expression had been replaced by wonder. Marcus continued his gentle performance for several more minutes, ensuring the crisis had fully passed before carefully tucking his bubble container back into his pocket. Jeffrey stood slowly, his own heart still pounding from the adrenaline of the past 10 minutes. He extended his hand toward Marcus, struggling to find words adequate to express his gratitude. The man who had just performed this small miracle was probably in his early 30s, with kind eyes and calloused hands that spoke of physical work rather than boardroom meetings. His clothes were practical and well-worn, suggesting someone more concerned with function than fashion. The moment their hands met in a simple handshake, Jeffrey felt something shift in his carefully controlled world, though he couldn't yet name what it was. The coffee shop on Pine Street became their unintentional meeting place over the following weeks. Jeffrey discovered that Marcus worked early morning shifts at the community center downtown, teaching art classes to seniors and maintaining the building's aging infrastructure. Their schedules aligned in an unexpected way that felt less like coincidence and more like the universe gently nudging them toward each other. Emma had asked repeatedly about the Bubble Man after their encounter at Pike Place Market, and when Jeffrey mentioned this to Marcus during their second-chance meeting outside the flower vendor's stall, Marcus had invited them to visit the community center's weekly family art sessions. The Roosevelt Community Center occupied a converted warehouse in a neighborhood that was slowly gentrifying around it. The building retained its industrial bones while housing programs that served everyone from elderly immigrants learning English to teenagers working on college applications after school. Marcus moved through these spaces with the easy familiarity of someone who belonged there completely. He knew every regular participant by name, remembered details about their families and struggles, and somehow managed to make everyone feel like the most important person in the room when he spoke with them. Jeffrey watched this transformation with growing fascination. The quiet man who had materialized during Emma's crisis revealed himself to be something of a community cornerstone, though he wore this role with such humility that it took Jeffrey several visits to fully understand Marcus's influence. Children gravitated toward him naturally, drawn by his patient attention and the way he listened to their ideas as if they were the most brilliant concepts he had ever encountered. Adults sought his advice on everything from home repairs to family conflicts, trusting his judgment in matters that extended far beyond his official responsibilities. Emma flourished in this environment. The art sessions provided her with an outlet for emotions she couldn't yet articulate, and Marcus had an intuitive understanding of how to guide her creativity without overwhelming her sensitive nature. He taught her to mix colors on a palette using techniques that required focus and patience, activities that naturally calmed her nervous system. When she struggled with frustration over a painting that didn't match her vision, Marcus would quietly appear beside her easel with a small container of bubble solution, blowing a few perfect spheres to reset her emotional state, before offering gentle suggestions for approaching her work differently. The friendship between Emma and Marcus's son Ryan developed with the easy intimacy of children who recognize kindred spirits in each other. Ryan was 8 years old, 2 years Emma's senior, but possessed the kind of emotional intelligence that allowed him to instinctively adjust his energy to match hers. He had inherited his father's gift for creating calm spaces, though his method involved elaborate storytelling rather than bubbles. Ryan would weave fantastical tales about the characters in Emma's paintings, giving voice to her artistic expressions in ways that helped her process complex feelings about loss and change. Jeffrey found himself staying longer at the community center than necessary, initially justifying these extended visits as beneficial for Emma's emotional development. The truth was more complicated. Something about the rhythm of life in this place appealed to him in ways he couldn't quite articulate. After years of operating in environments where every interaction was transactional and every relationship served a strategic purpose, the genuine connections he witnessed here felt almost revolutionary. Marcus never asked probing questions about Jeffrey's work or background, but his quiet attention encouraged confidences that Jeffrey rarely shared with anyone. During one particularly difficult evening when Emma was struggling with nightmares about her mother, Jeffrey found himself describing the overwhelming responsibility of single parenthood to Marcus, while their children worked on a collaborative mural project. The conversation unfolded naturally, without the performative vulnerability that characterized most of Jeffrey's professional relationships. Marcus listened with the same focused attention he brought to everything else, offering insights that came from experience rather than theory. He spoke briefly about his own challenges raising Ryan alone, though Jeffrey sensed deeper stories beneath the surface that Marcus wasn't yet ready to share. There was something in the careful way Marcus spoke about Ryan's mother that suggested loss rather than abandonment, but Jeffrey respected the boundaries that Marcus seemed to need around certain topics. The weekly art sessions expanded into occasional weekend visits to nearby parks and museums. Marcus had an encyclopedic knowledge of Seattle's family-friendly spaces, particularly those that offered hands-on learning experiences. He introduced Emma to the glass-blowing demonstrations at the Center for Wooden Boats, where she watched master craftsmen create delicate ornaments with the same mesmerized attention she gave to Marcus's bubbles. These outings never felt forced or artificial, but rather like natural extensions of the friendship that was developing between their families. Jeffrey began to notice changes in his own behavior during these relaxed weekends. The constant mental calculations that typically occupied his thoughts, revenue projections, staffing decisions, competitive analyses, faded into background noise when he was focused on Emma's laughter or Marcus's gentle teaching methods. He found himself present in moments rather than perpetually planning for future ones, a shift that felt both foreign and surprisingly refreshing. The community center's annual fundraising challenges revealed another dimension of Marcus's character. Despite his modest income, he consistently contributed both time and money to ensure the center could continue serving its diverse population. Jeffrey observed Marcus organizing volunteer work parties to repair aging equipment, coordinating donation drives for families facing financial hardships, and quietly covering registration fees for children whose parents couldn't afford art supplies. These acts of generosity were performed without fanfare or recognition, suggesting a value system that prioritized community welfare over personal advancement. Emma's progress during this period exceeded anything Jeffrey had hoped for when he first sought professional help for her anxiety. Her sleep patterns stabilized, her appetite returned to normal levels, and she began talking about her mother with fondness rather than overwhelming sadness. The panic attacks that had terrorized both of them throughout the spring became increasingly rare, replaced by a growing confidence in her ability to manage difficult emotions. Jeffrey credited Emma's therapist for some of this improvement, but he couldn't ignore the correlation between her emotional stability and their regular presence in Marcus's calming orbit. The question of what was developing between Jeffrey and Marcus remained unspoken, but increasingly present. Their interactions carried an undercurrent of mutual respect that felt different from simple friendship, yet neither man seemed ready to acknowledge or explore these deeper currents. Jeffrey caught himself looking forward to their meetings with an anticipation that extended beyond Emma's therapeutic needs, and he sometimes noticed Marcus's gaze lingering on him with an expression he couldn't quite interpret. This careful dance of growing attraction might have continued indefinitely if not for the conversation that changed everything. On a particularly quiet Saturday afternoon, while Emma and Ryan worked together on individual projects, Marcus mentioned his previous career almost casually, as if it were a minor detail rather than a revelation that would completely reshape Jeffrey's understanding of the man he was slowly falling for. The revelation came disguised as casual conversation on a drizzly Thursday evening while Jeffrey waited for Emma to finish her watercolor project. Marcus was cleaning paintbrushes at the industrial sink, his movements methodical and practiced, when he mentioned that Ryan had been asking about his old job again. Jeffrey assumed this referred to previous maintenance work or perhaps a different community center, so he was unprepared when Marcus quietly added that explaining theoretical physics to an 8-year-old presented certain challenges. Jeffrey's hand stilled on the supply cabinet he had been organizing. Theoretical physics wasn't typically associated with community center maintenance staff or part-time art instructors. He turned to study Marcus more carefully, noting details he had previously overlooked. The way Marcus's eyes tracked mathematical patterns in the children's abstract paintings, his unconscious habit of organizing art supplies according to precise geometric principles, the advanced vocabulary that occasionally slipped into his conversations with parents about their children's developmental progress. When Jeffrey gently pressed for more information, Marcus seemed to realize he had opened a door he usually kept carefully closed. After ensuring the children were absorbed in their projects, he sat down across from Jeffrey at one of the small tables and began to share a story that transformed everything Jeffrey thought he knew about the humble man who had saved his daughter with nothing more than soap bubbles and infinite patience. Marcus Chen had been a rising star in the theoretical physics department at the University of Washington until 3 years ago. His research focused on quantum mechanics applications in materials science, work that had attracted attention from major technology companies and government research facilities. He had published papers in prestigious journals, delivered keynote speeches at international conferences, and received funding for projects that could have revolutionized manufacturing processes across multiple industries. His laboratory occupied prime real estate in the physics building, and his graduate students competed for positions on his research team. The academic world that Marcus described sounded familiar to Jeffrey, though from the technology rather than scientific side. The pressure to secure continuous funding, the politics of university departments, the delicate balance between pure research and practical applications. Marcus spoke about his former life with the same quiet thoughtfulness he brought to everything else, neither celebrating his achievements nor dismissing them, simply acknowledging a chapter that had definitively ended. Ryan's mother, Dr. Linda Zhao, had been Marcus's research partner and eventually his wife. She specialized in computational modeling, creating complex simulations that tested Marcus's theoretical frameworks before they moved to physical experiments. Their collaboration had produced groundbreaking work on quantum dot applications in solar energy technology, research that promised to dramatically improve renewable energy efficiency. They had been featured together on the cover of Physics Today, celebrated as a power couple whose personal and professional partnership was advancing the field in unprecedented ways. Jeffrey listened with growing amazement as Marcus described their shared laboratory, their joint publications, their plans for expanding their research into commercial applications. This was a world Jeffrey understood intimately, though from the business rather than academic perspective. He recognized the dynamics Marcus described, the intoxicating combination of intellectual discovery and potential financial success that drove so many technology innovations. The tragedy that ended Marcus's academic career had occurred during what should have been their greatest triumph. Linda had been presenting their latest findings at a major conference in Geneva, while Marcus remained in Seattle to oversee critical experiments. Her presentation had been scheduled for the final day of the conference, a prestigious speaking slot that would have established their research as the new standard in quantum materials science. The call came at 3 a.m, Seattle time. Linda had suffered a massive stroke in her hotel room, likely triggered by an undiagnosed genetic condition that created blood clots under stress. By the time colleagues found her, the damage was irreversible. Marcus had flown to Switzerland immediately, but Linda never regained consciousness. She died 5 days later, surrounded by the academic colleagues who had become their extended family over years of shared research. The months following Linda's death had shattered Marcus's carefully constructed professional identity. Ryan, barely 5 years old at the time, required stability and emotional support that Marcus couldn't provide while maintaining his demanding research schedule. The laboratory that had once felt like a second home became a constant reminder of conversations he would never have again, experiments they would never complete together, discoveries that would remain forever unfinished. Marcus had attempted to continue his work, hiring postdoctoral researchers to fill Linda's role and pushing forward with their established research agenda. But the passion that had driven his scientific curiosity had died with his wife. Publications felt meaningless without her insights to strengthen his arguments. Conference presentations became exercises in performing enthusiasm he no longer felt. Grant applications required him to make promises about future discoveries that felt impossible to keep. The final decision to leave academia had come when Ryan asked why Daddy spent so much time at work being sad instead of staying home where they could be sad together. The simple wisdom of a grieving child had crystallized what Marcus already knew but hadn't been willing to admit. His research career, no matter how prestigious or potentially lucrative, meant nothing if it prevented him from being the father Ryan needed during the most difficult period of their lives. Jeffrey found himself reassessing every interaction he had witnessed between Marcus and the community center participants. The patient way Marcus explained complex concepts to elderly students wasn't just natural teaching ability, it was the skill of someone accustomed to making advanced ideas accessible to diverse audiences. His intuitive understanding of how different people learned reflected years of mentoring graduate students with varying backgrounds and learning styles. Even his approach to managing the building's mechanical systems showed the systematic thinking of someone trained to solve complex problems through methodical analysis. The humble maintenance worker who had appeared during Emma's crisis was actually one of the most brilliant scientists Jeffrey had ever encountered, someone whose research could have generated millions in patent revenue, and whose expertise was now devoted to fixing broken air conditioning units and teaching watercolor techniques to senior citizens. The magnitude of Marcus's sacrifice for his son's well-being struck Jeffrey with unexpected force. Marcus seemed uncomfortable with Jeffrey's obvious amazement, quickly steering the conversation toward Ryan's current interests rather than dwelling on his own former accomplishments. This deflection itself revealed something profound about Marcus's character. He had genuinely let go of his previous identity, finding meaning in his current role without resentment or regret for the path not taken. The evening's revelations continued when Marcus mentioned that he still maintained relationships with former colleagues, occasionally consulting on projects that interested him but could be completed remotely. Major technology companies sometimes contacted him for advice on materials science applications, conversations he conducted from his modest apartment, while Ryan worked on homework at the kitchen table. The disconnect between his current circumstances and his potential earning power was staggering, yet Marcus spoke about these opportunities as minor inconveniences rather than tempting alternatives to his chosen life. Jeffrey realized he was witnessing something rare in his experience. Someone who had voluntarily stepped away from success and status for reasons that had nothing to do with failure or inability to compete. Marcus had been offered positions at private research facilities and technology companies, opportunities that would have provided financial security and professional recognition while allowing him to continue his scientific work. He had declined them all, choosing instead the modest salary and flexible schedule of community center employment because it allowed him to be fully present for Ryan's childhood. The conversation was interrupted when Emma approached their table, proudly displaying her completed watercolor of the Space Needle surrounded by floating bubbles. The image perfectly captured the magical realism of her recent experiences, and Marcus's enthusiastic response to her artistic achievement reminded Jeffrey that this remarkable man's greatest talent might not be quantum physics at all, but rather his ability to see potential and beauty in whatever appeared before him, whether it was theoretical frameworks for renewable energy or a 6-year-old's imaginative painting. The demolition notice arrived on a Monday morning that started like any other, except for the official city envelope that had been slipped under the Roosevelt Community Center's main door sometime during the weekend. Marcus discovered it while opening the building for the senior citizens' morning exercise class, and by the time Jeffrey arrived with Emma for their usual after-school visit, the atmosphere inside had shifted to something approaching panic. The notice was bureaucratic in its coldness, informing the community center's board of directors that their lease would not be renewed beyond the current fiscal year. The building had been purchased by Morrison Digital Solutions as part of a comprehensive urban development initiative designed to revitalize the downtown corridor through strategic technology sector expansion. Demolition was scheduled to begin in 4 months, with construction of a state-of-the-art corporate campus expected to commence immediately thereafter. Jeffrey felt the blood drain from his face as he read the document over Marcus's shoulder. His own signature appeared at the bottom of the purchase authorization, a routine approval he had processed 3 weeks earlier without considering the human impact of what he had dismissed as another standard real estate acquisition. The Roosevelt Community Center had been listed in the project files as underutilized municipal property, suitable for redevelopment, a clinical description that bore no resemblance to the vibrant community hub he had come to know intimately. The irony was devastating in its completeness. Jeffrey had unknowingly initiated the destruction of the place that had become central to his daughter's healing and his own emotional awakening. The man he was falling in love with would lose his job, his purpose, and the community that had become his chosen family, all because of a decision Jeffrey had made while reviewing quarterly expansion targets in his climate-controlled executive office. Marcus read the notice twice before looking up at Jeffrey with an expression that contained no accusation, only a profound sadness that somehow made Jeffrey feel worse than anger would have. The children in the art room continued their projects, unaware that their sanctuary had just received a death sentence, while the adults who had gathered to discuss the crisis spoke in hushed tones about alternatives that everyone knew didn't exist. The community center served a population that no other facility in the area could accommodate. The seniors who attended daily exercise classes lived in nearby subsidized housing and couldn't afford transportation to distant recreation centers. The after-school programs provided safe spaces for children whose parents worked multiple jobs and couldn't arrange private childcare. The weekend family arts sessions had become lifelines for single parents like Jeffrey, who needed community support but couldn't access traditional social services due to income restrictions or scheduling conflicts. Jeffrey excused himself from the emergency meeting and walked to his car in a daze, his mind racing through calculations that had nothing to do with business metrics. He could reverse the purchase decision, but doing so would require explanations to his board of directors that he wasn't prepared to provide. The community center property was part of a larger development package that included 2 adjacent lots and significant tax incentives from the city. Withdrawing from the deal would cost Morrison Digital Solutions millions in penalties and potentially damage relationships with municipal partners that had taken years to cultivate. More problematically, Jeffrey's professional reputation was built on his ability to make objective business decisions without emotional interference. His board had specifically praised his unsentimental approach to growth opportunities during his last performance review. Reversing a major real estate acquisition because of personal relationships would raise questions about his judgment and leadership capabilities that could undermine his position as CEO. The drive back to his Belltown penthouse gave Jeffrey time to consider options that might preserve both his business interests and the community center. He could arrange for Morrison Digital Solutions to fund alternative facilities for the displaced programs, though finding appropriate space in Seattle's competitive real estate market would be challenging and expensive. He could provide generous severance packages for affected staff members like Marcus, helping them transition to new employment while maintaining the development timeline. These solutions felt inadequate, even as Jeffrey formulated them. The Roosevelt Community Center's value couldn't be replicated through financial compensation or relocated to a different building. The relationships, traditions, and sense of belonging that had developed over decades couldn't be transferred to a sterile new facility, no matter how well equipped or conveniently located. Jeffrey spent the evening researching the community center's history, discovering details that made his decision even more agonizing. The building had been donated to the city by a local family whose son had died in Vietnam, with the stipulation that it be used for programs serving low-income residents. 3 generations of families had participated in its programs, creating a continuity of community involvement that was rare in Seattle's rapidly changing neighborhoods. The center's financial records revealed another layer of complexity. Despite its modest budget, the facility operated with remarkable efficiency, providing services that would cost the city far more if delivered through traditional municipal programs. Marcus's salary was a fraction of what comparable positions paid at other nonprofit organizations, yet his contributions extended far beyond his official job description. He had written successful grant applications that funded equipment purchases, organized volunteer projects that saved thousands in maintenance costs, and created programming innovations that had been adopted by community centers throughout the region. Emma's questions about their missed visit to the community center forced Jeffrey to confront the personal dimensions of his dilemma. She had been looking forward to showing Marcus her latest painting and working with Ryan on their collaborative sculpture project. The disappointment in her eyes when Jeffrey explained that the center was temporarily closed reminded him of her expression during those first terrible weeks after Sarah's death, when every stability in her world had seemed to crumble without warning. The sleepless night that followed brought Jeffrey no closer to a resolution that felt ethically acceptable. Every potential solution required sacrifices that seemed fundamentally unfair to someone involved. Preserving the community center would damage his company and potentially his career. Proceeding with the development would destroy a place that had become essential to his daughter's well-being and would effectively end his relationship with Marcus before it had really begun. Tuesday morning's board meeting proceeded as scheduled, with Jeffrey presenting quarterly financial results and fielding questions about upcoming projects with his usual professional competence. The Roosevelt Community Center development was mentioned only briefly as one item in a portfolio of real estate acquisitions that were progressing according to schedule. None of his fellow board members had any reason to know about Jeffrey's personal connection to the property, and he offered no information that might complicate their straightforward enthusiasm for the project's profit potential. The meeting concluded with unanimous approval of the development timeline and budget allocation for demolition contractors. Jeffrey signed the necessary authorizations with hands that remained steady, despite the turmoil in his chest. His colleagues congratulated him on another successful expansion initiative, unaware that he was authorizing the destruction of his own happiness, along with an irreplaceable community resource. The decision Jeffrey made as he sat alone in his office afterward, staring at the signed demolition orders, would determine not only the fate of the Roosevelt Community Center, but also who he wanted to be as a father, as a community member, and as a man who might be worthy of someone like Marcus Chen. The choice before him wasn't really about real estate development or corporate strategy. It was about whether the person he had become through knowing Marcus and witnessing the community center's impact was someone he wanted to remain. or whether the businessman who could authorize such destruction without hesitation was his true identity after all. Jeffrey's resignation letter sat on his desk for 2 hours before he found the courage to deliver it to the board chair. The document was brief and professional, citing personal priorities and a desire to pursue new opportunities that aligned better with his evolving values. He didn't mention the Roosevelt Community Center by name, nor did he explain the connection between his decision and the development project that would soon be canceled due to unforeseen complications with municipal permits. The emergency board meeting convened that afternoon was exactly as contentious as Jeffrey had anticipated. His fellow directors questioned his judgment, his timing, and his commitment to the company he had built from nothing. The financial implications of withdrawing from the community center development were significant, though not catastrophic for a company of Morrison Digital Solutions' size. More concerning to the board was the precedent of allowing personal considerations to influence major business decisions. Jeffrey listened to their arguments with the patience of someone who had already made an irreversible choice. When pressed to explain his reasoning, he spoke honestly about discovering that corporate success meant nothing if it required destroying the communities that gave life meaning. His words were met with skeptical silence from executives who had never questioned whether business growth and human welfare might sometimes be incompatible goals. The transition period lasted 3 weeks, during which Jeffrey worked to ensure Morrison Digital Solutions would continue thriving under new leadership while he figured out what came next in his own life. His replacement as CEO was competent and ambitious, someone who would undoubtedly pursue expansion opportunities with the single-minded focus that Jeffrey no longer possessed. The community center development was quietly shelved, attributed to regulatory complications that made the project financially unfeasible. Marcus learned about the development's cancellation through the same administrative channels that had delivered the original demolition notice. The reprieve was celebrated throughout the Roosevelt Community Center as a miraculous last-minute intervention, though Marcus seemed more puzzled than relieved by the sudden reversal. When Jeffrey arrived for what he assumed would be their final visit together, Marcus was supervising the children's celebration mural while fielding congratulatory phone calls from community members who had mobilized too late to prevent a disaster that had somehow prevented itself. The conversation that followed took place in the center's small kitchen while Emma and Ryan worked together on thank you cards for the mysterious benefactor who had supposedly intervened to save their programs. Jeffrey's explanation of his role in both threatening and ultimately preserving the community center was halting and incomplete, hampered by his uncertainty about whether Marcus would see his actions as redemptive or simply evidence of the casual power that wealthy individuals wielded over vulnerable communities. Marcus listened without interruption, his expression shifting from confusion to understanding to something that might have been admiration. When Jeffrey finished his stammering account of corporate maneuvering and personal transformation, Marcus was quiet for a long moment before asking the question that Jeffrey had been dreading. What would happen now that Jeffrey had sacrificed his position as CEO for the sake of a community center and a relationship that had never been explicitly acknowledged between them? The answer came more easily than Jeffrey had expected. He had been contacted by several technology companies interested in hiring someone with his track record, and he had also been exploring opportunities to use his business expertise in service of nonprofit organizations that aligned with his newly clarified values. The financial security that had taken him years to build wouldn't disappear overnight, and he was discovering that the prospect of meaningful work appealed to him more than the pursuit of maximum profit margins. More importantly, he had realized during those sleepless nights of moral wrestling that his feelings for Marcus went far beyond gratitude or admiration. The quiet strength that had drawn him to Marcus during their first meeting had revealed itself to be part of a character that Jeffrey wanted to know intimately, to support, and perhaps to love openly if Marcus was willing to explore that possibility. Marcus's response was characteristically thoughtful and direct. He had been aware of the growing connection between them but had hesitated to acknowledge it, partly because of the apparent differences in their circumstances, and partly because he wasn't sure he was ready for the vulnerability that serious relationships required. Learning about Jeffrey's willingness to sacrifice professional success for principles he had only recently discovered suggested a depth of character that Marcus found both surprising and deeply attractive. The conversation was interrupted by Emma and Ryan, who burst into the kitchen with their completed thank you cards and demands that the adults examine their artistic efforts immediately. The children's excitement about their collaborative project provided a natural transition away from heavy emotional terrain, though the understanding that had passed between Jeffrey and Marcus created a new undercurrent to their interactions. 6 months later, the Roosevelt Community Center hosted its annual fundraising gala in the newly renovated gymnasium. The event showcased the expanded programming that had been made possible through a partnership with the Morrison Foundation, a nonprofit organization that Jeffrey and Marcus had established to support community-based education initiatives throughout the Pacific Northwest. Marcus had returned to part-time scientific consulting, contributing his expertise to renewable energy projects while maintaining his role as the center's education director. Jeffrey discovered that his business skills translated beautifully to nonprofit management, and his enthusiasm for their shared mission surprised colleagues who remembered his previous focus on profit maximization. Emma and Ryan served as the evening's unofficial hosts, proudly guiding visitors through displays of student artwork and explaining the center's various programs with the confidence of children who knew themselves to be valued community members. Their friendship had deepened into something resembling siblinghood, and they approached their parents' relationship with the matter-of-fact acceptance that children often bring to situations that adults find complicated. The gala's highlight was Marcus's demonstration of advanced bubble artistry, a performance that had evolved from his simple crisis intervention technique into an elaborate presentation that combined scientific principles with aesthetic beauty. Jeffrey watched from the audience as Marcus explained surface tension and geometric patterns to an enraptured crowd of children and adults, his voice carrying the same gentle authority that had first calmed Emma's panic in Pike Place Market. The evening concluded with Jeffrey and Marcus walking home together through the Seattle drizzle, their hands linked while Emma and Ryan raced ahead on the sidewalk, dodging raindrops and planning their next collaborative art project. The conversation flowed between practical matters about the Foundation's upcoming initiatives and more personal topics about their evolving relationship and blended family. As they reached Marcus's apartment building, Jeffrey reflected on the unexpected path that had led him from corporate executive to nonprofit founder, from emotional isolation to authentic partnership, from protecting his daughter through control to nurturing her growth through community connection. The transformation had required sacrificing certainties he had once considered essential, but the life he was building with Marcus felt more real and sustainable than anything his previous success had provided. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.